Just want to welcome the ladies and gentlemen. You tune into the Midnight Mirage School of Higher Learning once again. Just want to thank everybody for showing up. Hopefully you got a pen and notepad with you. Take some notes and research and look deeper into the topics that I'm going to talk about. Before we move forward, I want to thank everyone who has purchased the book in the past, who's purchased it recently, and those who plan to do it in the future. All right. You all keep this going, by financing that product, purchasing the product, because it's always good to have a physical, copy of information in your hand. So, yes, you have your internet and your phone and your computer or your laptop. But, let's say if your Wi-Fi go out one day or if the power is out and you just have, let's say, a candle lit, you'll always have that Midnight Mirage book there with you to be able to read. And, when you have conversations with other people, it's just something good to have in your hand physically. You don't always want to be caught up in the digital and the electronic world. We also want to have some real research in our hands. All right. So, just wanted to thank all the people, man, who have invested in that. That shows me that you're taking the information serious and you're taking your own personal life serious. And also you must take me serious, because anytime you put your money where your mouth is, that's showing something. So anybody that really salute, what your boy has been doing, get the book, please. Hit me up in the email, hit me up on the Cash App. And if you just like what I've been doing, maybe you like my personality and you like, where we taking all this, then just give a basic donation in the Cash App or something like that. $5, $10, it really don't matter. Just show a little love and show a little support. So we're going to talk about some good information. We're going into group economics. We're going to talk about the history of Shemitic, Israelite, and Canaanite Phoenician business. And we're going to talk about the history of the banking families. All right. So we're going to go into a lot of business history, understand how our people practiced group economics in the past, how we worked with other ethnic national groups, and how we were getting money. We were merchants, we were businessmen and businesswomen. All right. So all of us that, have some type of a skill and talent, and that can be turned into some type of a product and service. And you can create your own business. All right. And start practicing group economics with people that's in our ethnic national group and other groups. All right. So we're not prejudiced or so-called racist, because at the end of the day, we got to be a people about business. And that's what this whole ethnicity and nationality thing is to learn your history, learn who your people are, learn what the real culture is, implement that to your best ability in your personal life with your friends and family. So this ain't no thing when you go get on a megaphone and you standing on the side of the road trying to talk to every so-called black person and get them to do it. This ain't what that's for. You get this information and you work with those in your personal and private life, and you establish the Shemitic Israelite business culture with them. All right. So that's what you should be doing with this. So as I said, we're talking about group economics, history of Shemitic Israelite and Canaanite Phoenician business, and history of the banking families. So when you think about the modern day corporations, no matter what product or service they provide, when you think about the international bankers, those who provide the finance to all these various central banks, when these countries go to war or they're in debt and they need financing, need people to invest in them, it's these international bankers. When there are natural resources deep under the ground in various continents, but maybe the aboriginal people in that land don't have all the technology and the resources to dig it out, they'll seek the help of the international bankers and have to do a business deal with them. And of course, the international bankers always win in the end. So we're talking about the people who really run the world. Who were those people in the ancient world? Who were those people in the medieval world? All right. So that's what we're talking about. And before I go forward, just so you all are clear, the descendants of the ancient Shemitic Israelites and maybe a certain admixture and a certain, portion maybe of our people throughout medieval Europe and Europa, some of the Phoenician Canaanites. All right. So our people are these Shemitic Israelites, and this business, that we're talking about, this is your culture. So where we coming from, the sources, at least I'm coming out the Bible, the Old Testament. That's our primary history source. I'm coming out of the book that I wrote myself. And I'm also going to read another document. All right. And I'll give you the name of this document when we start reading it. So what we want to do first is we want to look into the business empire and the business activities of the Old Testament Israelite by the name of Solomon, the son of David. All right. We want to look at that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to read in 1 Kings chapter 5 and learn about King Solomon, who was a Shemitic Israelite. And we're going to read about King Hiram, who was a Canaanite Phoenician. So these were two men from two different nations, one from a nation of Shem, one from a nation of Ham. But nevertheless, they were doing business with each other. So let's read about it. Chapter 5. And Hiram, king of Tyre, sent his servants unto Solomon, for he had heard that they had anointed him king in the room of his father. For Hiram was ever a lover of David. And Solomon sent to Hiram, saying, Thou know that David my father could not build a house unto the name of the Lord his God, for the wars which were about him on every side, until the Lord put them under the soles of his feet. But now the Lord my God has given me rest on every side, so that there is neither adversary nor evil occurrent. And behold, I purpose to build an house unto the name of the Lord my God. And the Lord spoke unto David my father, saying, Your son, whom I will set upon the throne in thy room, he shall build a house unto my name. Now therefore command thou that they hew my cedar trees out of Lebanon, and my servants shall be with thy servants. And unto you will I give hire for thy servants, according to all that thou shalt appoint. For thou know that there is not among us any that can skill to hew timber like unto the Sidonians, or the Phoenicians, the Tyrians, the Canaanites. So what we have right here is King Solomon being anointed the new king of Israel. And his father David had a good relationship with the Phoenician king named Hiram of Tyre. So when Solomon took over the throne, he went to Hiram and said, Look, I'm the king of Israel now. You and my father had a good relationship. Nobody in my country, understands the masonry as good as you all do, because that's something that you all are specified, have a skill with. So I'm going to do business with you. We're going to do a business contract, and we're going to work together. And we're going to get some of the cedar trees of Lebanon, which was in his territory. And you're going to help me build the temple and other constructions that I have. And of course, the king of Tyre, or the Phoenician king, the Canaanite king, Hiram said, cool. So you have King Solomon, who's a Shemitic Israelite, doing business with King Hiram of Tyre. Okay. Also think about the Hiram from the Hiram of Biff story in the Shriners, quote unquote, mythology, and in the introduction to Freemasonry. All right. And Hiram being the master builder, and he builds the Temple of Solomon. And you have the three thieves who want to steal the teachings from him to become the master mason. So that story, that Masonic story, that Masonic allegory is based on this ancient history of King Tyre and the king of Tyre and the king of Israel, which is Solomon and Hiram. All right. So before we move forward, now that we have that understanding that Solomon said that there is no one among us that can hew the timber like those unto the Sidonians. So the Sidonians and the Tyrians, those are Canaanite Phoenicians. So when you hear that historical word Phoenician, a lot of the time it's talking about the Shemitic Israelites and the Canaanite Phoenicians who were doing business together, and the various little kingdoms and cities that they erected and created throughout the Mediterranean, throughout the Iberian Peninsula, throughout what we call northern so-called Europa, the United Kingdom, and as well in the Americas. Okay, in the Americas. So let's move forward. It says, so Hiram gave Solomon cedar trees and fir trees according to all his desire. So we have right here that in the various Canaanite territories, King Hiram got his men to get the cedar trees, the fir trees, all the necessary resources to now build the temple, of the Temple of Jerusalem. All right, for the Shemitic Israelite people. So they were doing business. We're talking about group economics still. So where we're going to go now, let's see. Wait a minute. Okay, we got that part. So now what we're going to do is we're going to skip over to 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 11, where they talk about the navy of Hiram, because they're doing business, but they're also doing a lot of traveling. They were navigators. So that term moorish or Moor also is a navigator, or the term a mariner. So, you know, you have the baseball team, the Mariners. All right. And you have that team, that term, the Marine, like the Marine Corps for the military. So think about the term. I think it's the Seattle Mariners. Yeah, my boy Ken Griffey. So you got the Mariners, and then you have the Marines. So think about those terms, dealing with the water, dealing with the oceans, dealing with traveling, being navigators. Also think about the Vikings. All right. Now, before we move forward, and I want to salute the brother Chronicles of Judah, because he helped me understand this with some research he put out. I remember one day, me and one of my partners, we went to this Jewish store, okay? And we were going in there to get some books, some prayer shawls, etc., right? So when we were in there and we were looking at the prayer shawls, I got the royal blue and white one. We already talked in the previous tape, what does the royal blue come from? That comes from the covenant that was made in Israel, that people have to keep the Sabbath and keep the different codes. When we made in the previous tape, when we talked about the blue ribbon, how you get that when you achieve a certain status in Israel, and you're going to keep the covenant. You and your higher self now, you in your true form as a judge or a God with a little g, you know, the sons of God. That's what that's all about. So you got the royal blue and white, but they also had purple and gold and white colors. So they had royal blue and white prayer shawls, and they had purple and gold prayer shawls. And I thought that was very peculiar, the purple and gold prayer shawls. And, you know, the brother I was with, he ended up getting one of the purple and gold ones. Well, when you think about the colors purple and gold, that color is associated with the ancient Phoenicians and the ancient Israelites, this coalition. OK, and the purple also represents royalty and divinity. So you'll see throughout medieval Europa and throughout even the ancient world, various civilizations where the kings and the queens will always be adorned in the royal purple, and also the burgundy, the royal burgundy, or that magenta color. All right. So that, you know, making of the royal purple was something that was an activity that the ancient Phoenicians and the Canaanites did. All right. And through their business and stuff like that, you know, they would trade with various, you know, empires and kingdoms and various, you know, people. And that's how these royal purple garments were being, you know, sold throughout the ancient world. And they were very, very expensive as well. So the royalty of Israel, you know, they would also wear the royal purple and gold. So when you think about the Minnesota Vikings, historically, the Vikings really are the Phoenicians and the Israelites when they were going on their various voyages throughout Europa, because the indigenous people to Europa are the Shemitic Israelites and the Canaanite Phoenicians and various other Hamitic cultures that were in the southern part of, you know, around the Mediterranean. OK, so when we think about the ancient Celts, the ancient Iberians, the ancient Hebrews of what we call modern day Spain and Portugal, you know, this is this Shemitic Israelite and Canaanite Phoenician mix. OK, so these people also were traveling to the Americas and going throughout modern day what we call Michigan and doing business with the aboriginal Americans, trading copper and other, you know, resources that were indigenous to the Americas. So you had Shemitic Israelites and Canaanite Phoenicians traveling to the Americas, doing business with the indigenous Americans, the indigenous Yamasee, the indigenous Iroquois, the indigenous Creek, the indigenous Algonquin, all these various tribes that were in the Americas who were a copper colored people. They were doing business with them. A lot of them, you know, when the Shemitic Israelites came here, they stayed and they were intermarried with the aboriginal women who were here. So a lot of us today, the Shemitic Israelite blood that we have is coming from a lot of those voyages and that traveling that those men were doing. But anyway, let's get back to what I wanted to get to right here. So in chapter 10, it says, and the navy also of Hiram that brought gold from Ophir brought in from Ophir great plenty of almug trees and precious stones. So it says, and the navy of Hiram that brought gold from Ophir brought in from Ophir great plenty of almug trees and precious stones. So it says that the Canaanite Phoenicians had a navy, or they were mariners. So you had Shemitic Israelites who were merchants and mariners as well. And these people were traveling and doing pretty much, everything you can think of. They were traffickers. Okay. A lot of the indigenous resources of South America, of what we call the Yucatan in modern day Central America. You had Shemitic Israelites and Canaanite Phoenician mariners traveling there, doing the same thing, sharing the culture, doing business with the aboriginal people in Central America, intermarrying with the families. And then a lot of them stayed. They had children. So when you think about the ancient Maya, when you think about the ancient Olmec, these are those people that I'm talking about. The ancient mound builders and pyramid builders of the Americas, a lot of this is a mixture between the copper colored people who were already here, Shemitic, and then the Shemitic Israelite people who are coming from the east. Okay. So it says right here, historically recorded in the Bible, in the Old Testament, that the Canaanite Phoenicians and the Shemitic Israelites had a navy, and they were traveling the waters, the quote unquote 7 seas. All right. Now let's move forward. The next thing we want to do is we're going to read about the voyages of King Solomon, because we just had right here in the Bible, it had it recorded. So now we're going to look into a document that I have called America Before Christ, Did King Solomon's Fleets Visit America? By William F. Dankingbring. Some of you all may have heard me read this before, but it's a good document and I'm going to reference it again. So it's called America Before Christ, Did King Solomon's Fleets Visit America? William Dankingbring. All right. It says, did ancient Hebrews reach the shores of North and South American continents thousands of years before Christopher Columbus? What evidence is there for Hebrew and Israelite occupation of the Western Hemisphere even 1,000 years before Christ? Was transatlantic commerce and travel fairly routine in the days of King Solomon of Israel? Read here the intriguing, fascinating saga of the true discoveries of America. All right. Now let's read right here. In his new book, The Origins and Empire of Ancient Israel, author historian Stephen M. Collins points out that the lost Lunas stone, end quote, inscription in archaic Hebrew was written in the Hebrew letters of the style of the Moabite stone, dated to about 1000 BC. This would place the writing on the stone to the time of the kingdom of ancient Israel under its most affluent and powerful king Solomon, who reigned from 1014 BC to 974 BC. So let's start from the top, all right? A stone in a dry creek bed in New Mexico, which is in North America. So they found in a dry creek bed a stone in New Mexico in North America, discovered by early settlers in this region, is one of the most amazing archaeological discoveries in the Western Hemisphere. It contains engraved on its flank the entire 10 Commandments written in ancient Hebrew script. Hebrew scholars such as Cyrus Gordon of Brandeis University near Boston have vouched for its authenticity. I visited the site of the huge boulder near Los Lunas, New Mexico in 1973 and photographed the Hebrew inscriptions. A local newspaper reporter guided me to the mysterious site located out in the middle of the New Mexico desert. We watched for rattlesnakes as we hiked into the spot where the boulder lies, unmoved it in sight for who knows how many mysterious centuries. Who put it there? Who wrote the incredible description of the 10 Commandments in an ancient Hebrew dialect? So in New Mexico in 1973, you have these people, and they found this stone with ancient Paleo-Hebrew writing on it, and they found it in 1973. Now, let me ask you a question. These people, these mariners were very smart men. Do you think that these people were coming from the Far East, the Mediterranean, ancient Israel, ancient Canaan? Do you think that they were coming over here with stones and big boulders already on their boats and then dropped them off and left them here in the Americas? Or do you think that somebody was here in the Americas already and they spoke the Paleo-Hebrew language and they carved that onto stones and rocks and boulders that were already here in the Americas, just like the Olmec heads. Do you think that whoever was traveling carried the Olmec heads on a boat from so-called East Africa and brought them all the way to the Americas? Or do you think that the Olmec heads were carved and created out of boulders that were already here in the Americas by a people who are already here in the Americas who look like the Olmec stones? Now you marinate on that. So anyway, let's keep going. Remember, we're talking about King Solomon, Shemitic Israelites, working with the Phoenician mariners, traveling to the Americas. All right. And this part right here is very, very important. Let's read that again. It says, King Solomon reigned from 1014 BC to 974 BC. So keep in mind, these Caucasian Jewish scholars and historians and archaeologists and the Caucasian Christian ones, a lot of them know that the Old Testament is a history book, that the Bible is a history book. So the men that are spoken about in the Bible are historical men. These are not mythological characters. Even if there are not tombs or mausoleums and graves found of all the people that's talked about in the Bible. But the way these archaeologists, Dr. Berryfield, these Harvard professors and stuff like that, they're dealing with this as these are real people. So this is history we're talking about. This is not mythology. This is not esotericism. This is not occultism. We're just talking about basic history. Just like in school, you would learn about Frederick Douglass. You would learn about Martin Luther King. Like they finna have this fake ass Black History Month come up in February. Why are they not talking about King Solomon during so-called Black History Month? Because he was a so-called black person. And he was a historical man, just like Frederick Douglass or just like so-called Harriet Tubman. So that mindset of thinking that the Bible is mythology, and I'm not saying that it doesn't have certain mythological aspects to it, to some of the stories, but these are based on historical events and historical people. And I'm going to leave it at that. All right, let's see. Let's see what else is in here that I want to read before we move forward. All right, here we are. Solomon's incredible wealth also strongly points to the Los Lunas stone inscription as having been carved during his reign. Financing sailing voyages of discovery and maritime trade is no small feat. Vast sums and investments are required. Solomon was the wealthiest king who ever lived and undoubtedly had the resources to fund such far-reaching and dangerous voyages. Also, during his reign, Israel was in league with other major world powers of the day, including Tyre and the Phoenicians and the nation of Egypt. Solomon married the daughter of Pharaoh, thus commencing that alliance. Didn't we just read about that in the Bible? So why are these people in this book saying that Solomon was one of the wealthiest men in the world, which is historically recorded in the Bible? And they're also saying that during his reign, he was in league with other major powers such as Tyre and the Phoenicians and the nation of Egypt. This is all coming straight from the Bible. That's why I'm saying this right now, because I want you to understand, like, where would these people who wrote this book, where would Blackbeard begin some of this history from? A lot of it is coming from the Bible. But if you don't know that the Bible is a history book, then you're going to think when you read it that they may be talking about religion or mythology. Okay? So I'm going to read this one more time. So that Los Lunas tablet that was found in New Mexico, all right, with that Hebrew writing on it, they're saying it was created during the reign of Solomon. Solomon's incredible wealth also points to the Los Lunas stone inscription as having been carved during his reign. Financing sailing voyages of discovery and maritime trade is no small feat. So we already learned about in Kings, the navy of Hiram. You think Hiram was going to just, power up his ships and then him finance it? He probably was telling Solomon, look, we got all the materials, we got all the men, we got the boats, we got the maps, etc., but we need some money to do all this. So Solomon financed the trip. So that means Solomon, he was what? He was a banker. He was a financier. So we're going into the history of the financing capital of Venice, Italy, aka Phoenician Italy, aka Phoenix, Italy. The word Venice, like Venice Beach in California, and the word Phoenix, like Phoenix, Arizona. Venetian, Phoenix, those are Canaanite Phoenician words. Tyre, okay? So what it says right here, financing sailing voyages of discovery and maritime trade is no small feat. Vast sums and investments are required. Solomon was the wealthiest king who ever lived and undoubtedly had the resources to fund such far-reaching and dangerous voyages. So he had the resources to fund this. Okay, so that's how it was paid for. All right, we're still talking about group economics. And also, let me say this too. Do you not think that if Solomon financed this trip, who do you think was on the boat doing the voyages to the Americas? It was the Shemitic Israelite men and the Canaan Phoenician men. That's who it was. I highly doubt that on many of their voyages, they had many women with them. Not saying that they didn't have any. Maybe it was some with them. But majority of the people who were coming here, they were men. And you had Shemitic Israelite men marrying aboriginal American women. So you have a Shemitic Israelite man and he would marry an ancient Yucatan, woman, an ancient Yamasee Creek woman, an ancient Seminole woman, an ancient Algonquin woman, the ancient Mississippian woman, an ancient Mayan woman. But they still were both copper-colored so-called black people. And today we're the descendants of that mix of two ethnic aboriginal groups of people. So remember, it was Shemitic Israelite men coming here. And in the Bible, how is the Shemitic Israelite ancestry guaranteed? Or I ain't gonna say guaranteed, but how is it traced, rather, It's traced through the father line. So if I'm telling you that the majority of the ancient Israelites that were coming here were men, which was more than likely thousands of them, and they were coming here and procreating with the aboriginal women here. Okay, you're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people multiplying from that as time is going on. And a lot of the people that were in Central America came through the Gulf of Mexico and they settled in what we call modern day Alabama, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, etc. So the ancient Mississippians, this is who those people are. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going just going to wrap up the part on understanding that during the reign of Israel, when Solomon was a king, he was in league with Tyre and the Phoenicians. And it's even recorded right here in this book. Okay. Let's see if it's something else. Let's read this part. And Stephen Collins write, quote, another factor powerfully supporting a dating of this ancient Hebrew inscription of the time of Solomon are the economic and logistic realities in the ancient world. Transoceanic expeditions and colonization efforts in the ancient world require a very large commitment of monetary and human resources. The source of such resources had to be the king of a wealthy nation. Because the New Mexico inscription is in ancient Hebrew, the sponsor for that ancient expedition had to be a very wealthy king of the ancient Israelites. Solomon, who was the wealthiest king of Israel, and he reigned at the time when the Israelites kept the 10 Commandments. This is on page 220 from his book. So even Stephen Collins agrees with me that King Solomon financed trips to the Americas. Many of those Shemitic Israelite men came here. They stayed. They were teaching the people who were here. And they were even speaking the Shemitic ancient Paleo-Hebrew language. All right, the Canaanite Phoenician language. Because when we talk about Paleo-Hebrew, that was branched off the ancient Canaanite language. All right. So understand that we're talking about history. We're talking about group finance. And we're talking about how Solomon did, business with Hiram and how all this stuff sprang from that group economics. OK, so all this gold, all this financing that was going on in South America. You see the ancient Peruvians, how they decked out in all this gold and all this stuff, all these precious jewels and all this stuff. This is what was going on. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to read in my own book, because I talk about the ancient Phoenicians or the ancient Canaanites in my own book on chapter 8. All right. In chapter 8 called Creatures from the Black Lagoon. Now, let me say this real quick. On the screen, what you have in front of you is an amalgamated Venetian. OK, the modern day people in Italy, in the city of so-called Venice, if you go there, you're going to see Caucasian people. You're going to see pale people. But those people were invaders. The indigenous people to so-called Italy, the indigenous original Sicilians, those were the Shemitic Israelite Canaanite Phoenician merchants and those people's families. All right. So when you see him right here, I wanted to show this picture because, for one, he's wearing the Royal Phoenician Israelite purple. And also he is standing on the checkerboard floor. OK, now remember when King Solomon said that the Canaanite Phoenicians were very, very skilled in masonry. So who do you think taught the Shemitic Israelites, besides when they were in, Babylonian captivity? But who do you think taught some of the Shemitic Israelites masonry? It was the Canaanite Phoenicians. And the masonry that they taught them in the different societies and groups that they inducted some of these Shemitic Israelites in were also the different Moloch and Baal cults that these Canaanite Phoenicians were a party to. Because you have to understand that the Canaanite Phoenicians, their religious culture was different from the Shemitic Israelites. OK, now King Hiram of Tyre had respect for Solomon, and he helped the creation and build the temple of God. So that means that he had to understand that they don't worship the same way that the Canaanite Phoenicians did. So either the king of Hiram, he respected how Solomon worshiped, and he even worshiped that way, and he admired the God of Israel, or he still was practicing his own culture, but they still were doing business and everything was cool. But nevertheless, he was involved in paganism. So when you think about the child sacrifice, like we talked in the previous tape about the bronze bull that is on the financial district, the stock, the finance district in New York, they got the bronze bull out there. Well, the bull is Moloch, aka Baal, and he's a Canaanite Phoenician god. And remember, we talked about him being a god of money and a god of business, and that you have to sacrifice to him to keep the corporation going, to keep the profits and the financing coming in, a god of vegetation, a god of fertility that can ensure things will grow. So they were into this. And a lot of them were practicing Satanism and Luciferianism behind closed doors. And they introduced these Shemitic Israelite men into the Freemasonic culture of standing on the checkerboard floor, dancing on the checkerboard floor, practicing duality, practicing being a hypocrite. So a lot of that, when you read in the Bible, when the different prophets are getting on the Israelites, when they're living in, Canaan, because they started to take on that religion. And this is where a lot of that, this is just some of the origins of Freemasonry. I don't want to get too far off the topic. So as you can see right here, he's dancing on the checkerboard floor, standing on the checkerboard floor, wearing the royal purple, because the checkerboard floor represents duality. OK, and when you still are split in duality, that means you're in contradiction. Should I go to work or should I not go to work? Should I stay in school or should I drop out? Do I want to keep working for this corporation or do I want to start my own business? So anytime you still, you stuck on what should I do? You going back and forth. You got the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other. You standing on the checkerboard floor. You dancing on the checkerboard floor. You really are in a state of confusion, because the term Babylon means confusion at its root. And the civilization of Babylon, not only in the ancient world, but even in this modern sense, they're going to always be civilizations of confusion. And the reason why is because when you start doing business and you working with various kingdoms and empires, you start, hanging out with people and you start adopting some of their cultural practices. Because this even happened to King Solomon. He started to take on some of the Sidonian Phoenician practices and worshiping Ashtaroth, worshiping Baal, worshiping Moloch, and creating high temples and high places to them. And it's recorded in the Bible. So when you get in so much money, sometimes it can go to your head. And it went to the head of King Solomon, and it went to the head of the other king of Tyre that we're going to read about in Ezekiel. OK, so, understand that's why, when niggas start getting money, you got to have your ego in check, and you got to spiritually already know who you are, because it's not the money that's evil. It's the lust of it. I don't even want to say the love of it. It's the lust of it and what you're willing to do for it. And ultimately that leads to the black magic Canaanite practices of child sacrifice, blood drinking, the different draconian cults, the different bacchanalian parties and cults, like I say, drinking blood, cannibalism. Like that's what the term cannibalism, Canaan cannibalism, Canaanite Phoenician cannibalism, a cannibal, Canaanite cannibal. You don't hear the word in it. So where do you think that practice of cannibalism comes from? The eating of the flesh. What do you think the practice that the Roman Catholic Church, the Eucharist, when they talking about they eating the flesh of Yahushua and drinking the blood of Yahushua, that they got niggas doing in church on Sunday? Where do you think that comes from? It comes from the ancient Canaanite Phoenicians that were into Satanism, that were into child sacrifice, that were into blood drinking, bloodletting. So when you hear about the ancient Maya in the Yucatan and how some of our aboriginal ancestors here, they were into the bloodletting, they were into the human sacrifice to the sun god, because a lot of the pyramids and the mounds we would build, although they were beautiful buildings, just showing basically the intellect of man, but a lot of our priests and leaders and kings perverted them and contaminated them because they went in there and started doing their paganistic practices to the sun god, doing child sacrifice, doing pedophilia rituals in there, having orgies and all this other stuff. So this is a lot of what they was doing at the top of the pyramids when they would defile these temples with these practices. Just like how when Yahushua came in the temple and he saw niggas in there selling, doing business and all this other stuff like that. You don't turn the house of God into a whorehouse, and he turned the money table over and stuff like that. So a lot of that stuff that we were doing here in the Americas, having wars just to have people to sacrifice to the sun god so we can make sure that our investments work, so we can make sure that the crops grow, so we will make sure that the God of the seven seas makes sure that the boats and the storms don't destroy us, so we can make it to our destination and that we don't lose profits. All the accounting that we've done, make sure that the numbers line up. So that's why these niggas was doing this Satanism. That's why they were sacrificing these children. That's why they were doing all this stuff, worshiping the fertility goddess, because they didn't want their money fucked up. Do you understand what I'm saying? So the checkerboard floor is the Freemasonic symbol, going back to ancient Canaan, ancient Israel, and showing that you have now entered the school of learning. And you're either going to learn this stuff for what it is and synthesize the black and the white or the red and the blue, because what two colors make purple? Red and blue. And the red and blue are just like the black and the white. They represent the duality. They represent the two sides. So you have to be of knowledge and wisdom and understanding and synthesize the red and the blue. See things from an objective point of view. And that's what the purple represents. It represents divinity. It represents royalty. It represents basically godhood and being in a place of understanding, being a judge, being a god with a little g. That's why they wore it. And the Canaanite Phoenicians, they worship Tammuz, and they worship the horn deity. OK, so they wore the purple also in adoration to him. And also, too, it was associated with certain fruits that would come off of a tree. OK, I want to say it was the palm tree. OK, because they was also worshiping the trees. So remember, all this stuff ultimately is about fruitfulness, business, compound interest, money multiplying, making a return on your investment, profit. That's what all this shit is about. Understand that. Understand that. So in my own book, as I said, I talk about the Canaanite Phoenicians. Let's read about them a little bit. All right. After the decline of the Western Roman Empire, the maritime Republic of Venice was established as a trading powerhouse in northeast Italy. Ancestors of the Venetians were the original Phoenicians, and they continued the legacy of seashore kingdoms with international trade networks. Let me reread that. Ancestors of the Venetians with a V were the original Phoenicians with a P, and they continue the legacy of seashore kingdoms with international trade networks. Early generations of Venice were mixed communities of full-blooded Moors, amalgamated Moors, and the pale whites associated with them. Along the Adriatic coast of East Italy, Venice does business using ancient trade routes set by Old Phoenicia and their ships to transport goods throughout Moorish Barbary and Tartary. During the Bronze Age, indigenous Amaru, or indigenous Americans, operated copper mines in present-day Michigan, attracting buyers from Atlantean colonies along the Mediterranean. Researchers found a shipwreck off the coast of Turkey holding pure copper and credited ancient seafarers from America for its origins. Most European copper comes from ancient Venetian connections to Moorish America's resources. So what we have right here is, I'm just going into how the people of Venice today, modern day Venice, their ancestry, or at least they're claiming, is the Canaanite Phoenicians, the original ones. All right. And ancient Venice, or even modern Venice, is a mixture of full-blooded Moorish people, amalgamated Moorish people, and the pale whites. So this man you see right here is one of the amalgamated Moorish people, or the pale whites, who came in later. They came into Italy much later, but they took on the culture of the people who were already there, which were a mixture of Shemitic Israelite people and Canaanite Phoenician people. So when you see him right here wearing the royal purple, standing on the checkerboard floor, he stole that from his, Phoenician forefathers, who were the original Moorish people. Because when we say Moorish, we're talking about the copper-colored people. So these are still the Shemitic Israelites and the Canaanite Phoenicians. So you'll hear me call them Moorish Phoenicians or Moorish Israelites. I'm just talking about the original ones, the full-blooded ones. All right. All right. We still in my book. Volcanic eruptions in the Great Lakes regions billions of years ago crystallized copper elementals, and after several glacial periods, genuine copper was exposed from underneath layered basalt lava beds. From King Solomon's Triple Alliance, including Phoenicia, tons of bronze and copper flood the Mediterranean markets. Moorish Aztecs from Mexico, or Mexico, traveled the Mississippi River and founded Amaru kingdoms along America's ancient waterway. The remnant of their presence is seen in the Aztlan State Park of Wisconsin and Phoenix, or Venetian city of Atlanta. Moorish Hebrews from the Mediterranean kept maps in family vaults. Excuse me, let me read this part. So it says a remnant of their presence is seen in the Aztlan State Park of Wisconsin. So there's a state park in Wisconsin called Aztlan. All right. Where we also get the word Atlanta or Atlantis or Aztec. OK, so you have the Aztec Park in Wisconsin, and then you have Phoenix, Arizona, or the Phoenician city. That's where Phoenix, Arizona gets that name from. And also Atlanta. So Aztlan or Atlanta, like Atlanta, Georgia. This is all going back to that ancient Shemitic culture in the Americas and Israel and Canaan. All right. And it says that Moorish Hebrews from the Mediterranean kept maps in family vaults and passed them down to descendants. Venetian traders, even to this day, were known to use the Judean winged lion as a symbol, which speaks to its primeval past. So the maps and the different, documents that were showing how do you get from the Mediterranean to the Americas, our people would, keep them safeguarded. The various Shemitic Israelite mariners and Canaanite Phoenician mariners that were doing business, those merchants, they would hide those maps. But during the Punic Wars versus the Romans, who were also melanated people, but they were amalgamated as well. They went to war with ancient Carthage. All right. And ancient Carthage actually were the Canaanite Phoenicians and some of the Shemitic Israelites. So, through that war and the destruction of Carthage, that's how Rome started to take over certain stuff. So when Carthage started to fall, that's when a lot of Shemitic Israelite business and a lot of the things we had in the Iberian Peninsula and throughout Europe started to be bothered, I'll say. All right. So also, when you think of the Holy Roman Empire, a lot of those were Shemitic Israelite families, as well. OK, so that's pretty much who was ruling Europe. All right. And I go deeper into the merchant aristocratic families of Venice, who are also your bankers. OK, so now let's see. Let's see one more part. Well, what I want you to remember, because I don't want to spoil it for you, I just want you to understand that the bankers were the Canaanite Phoenicians and the Shemitic Israelites. OK, just keep that in mind. So next, what we're going to go to Ezekiel chapter 27, and we're going to read about, some of the various merchants. OK, just a little more history to understand who we talking about and what we dealing with. Now, I really want to skip down to, Ezekiel 27, verse 15. But what we have is we talking about the king of Tyre. And remember, as I said, once you start doing business and you making so much money, you become arrogant. OK, you become arrogant and you become a tyrant. All right. Potentially, not all people who get money, but that potential is there if you're not careful. But anyway, it says, the men of Dedan were the merchants. Many isles were the merchandise of thine hand. They brought thee for a present horns of ivory and ebony. Syria was the merchant by reason of the multitude of the wares of the making. They occupied in thy fairs with emeralds, purple, and broidered work, and fine linen, and coral, and agate. Judah and the land of Israel, they were merchants. They traded in thy market wheat of Minnith, and Panag, and honey, and oil, and balm. So what we want to look at right here is it said that Syria, Syro-Phoenician, Syro-Canaanite, that's where some of the Canaanite Phoenicians were doing business, and the Shemitic Israelites. So think about Syria. It says Syria was thy merchant by reason of the multitude. And in Syria, they were doing business selling emeralds, purple and broidered work, fine linen, coral, and agate. So this purple garment that you see him wearing of royalty, this is the type of stuff they were selling in Syria, provided by the ancient Canaanite Phoenicians, because they knew how to make that purple and make that burgundy color and make different, garments and clothing items out of it. All right. So that's where that's recorded at in the Bible as well. Old Testament in Ezekiel. Where did the royal purple come from? That these kings and queens of Rome, ancient so-called Greece, the medieval Europa, even here in the Americas, where did they get that idea of wearing the royal purple from? That's the ancient Canaanites and the ancient Israelites. All right. So next, what we're going to do is I want to talk a little bit about the Knights Templars, Freemasonry, and the Holy Crusades. Some of the Moorish Knights Templars learning occultism from Shemitic Moslems in Jerusalem, or the worship of the Baphomet. So during the early 1100s, you had a lot of the Shemitic Israelite families go to war with some of these Shemitic Muslim families in Jerusalem. And they were battling over the Holy Land. OK, now these were both people of color fighting each other, but they were using pale Arabs and they were using pale Christian WIGHT whites that really were wild people shaved down, and they were sending them to fight. So you had a lot of them traveling from Western Europe traveling through Eastern Orthodox Christian territory, and eventually ending up in the Levant and going to war with some of the, Shemitic Moslems in that area. OK, when the Knights Templars, which were Moorish, Christian knights, they went to war down there. They were hanging out in the Levant. But remember, where are they going? Also, they're going to Canaan. And what did I tell you was in Canaan? The occultism, the esotericism, the child sacrifice, learning about business, learning about financing, learning about banking, and most importantly, learning how to please the fertility god, learning how to please the sun god, learning how to please the money god so your business continues to work. So a lot of that blood drinking, sacrifice, worshiping of the goat head and all that, a lot of those Knights Templars learned that from the people in the Levant. Some of the Islamic Muslims who were Shemitic people, but they still were mixing some of that practice into Islam, and they had bastardized it. And they had their own little secret societies and little Shriner groups and stuff like that. So all these Freemason and Shriner groups today, they were originally started by Moorish people. It's just, just today, a lot of it has been flipped around. But understand, though, that during, the Holy Crusades, when you had the various, Moorish families of Europa fighting against the Islamic Muslim families of Jerusalem, to get the Holy Land back. And of course, we all know that history. There was, the Christians would hold it sometimes. Then, of course, the Muslims eventually came back under Saladin and took it back. And pretty much, well, during World War One, when Great Britain and Rothschild, because Rothschild financed it, the Pale Rothschild, they went back and took the Holy Land back from a certain remnant of the Osman Ali Empire of the early 1900s. And since then, up until this day, you have a Pale WIGHT group of people living in the Holy Land, proposing or flexing as they are the Shemitic Israelites, people of the ancient world, but they're not. So these Knights Templars also, because it was very, very dangerous during the Holy Crusades, they would safeguard your assets, and they would give you a receipt or a certain document that you could use when you were traveling throughout Europa to purchase food, and purchase different items you need. And the value of it would be based on the assets that they were safeguarding from you. OK, so they were bankers and they were also a military. And through this practice, they started to acquire a lot of power. In addition to, they got very egotistical. They started to have issues with various kings and queens of Europa. They started having issues with the Catholic Church. A lot of people got in debt with them. And in addition, they were doing a lot of the Baphomet Canaanite worship behind closed doors, even though a lot of the kings and queens of Europa were doing it as well, especially France and especially the Roman Catholic Church behind closed doors. But in 1307, I want to say, on Friday, the so-called 13th, it was the king of France, along with the Catholic Church. They started to purge the Knights Templars, and, they accused them of child pedophilia and things of that nature, because a lot of them were doing that. But the reason they were doing it is because they were trying to appease the finance and banking god Moloch, so their corporations and their money would continue to grow. OK, so they were basically standing and dancing on the checkerboard floor, practicing the Freemasonry, practicing the Shriner shit. And this is really the history of a lot of the banking and finance families. OK, so a lot of these Freemasonic lies and a lot of the propaganda, the marketing, the false culture, the poisonous pop culture that they put out that they want the masses to follow. This is all being financed by the international bankers, the 1% of the 1%, the ruling families of the world today, the modern day so-called amalgamated Pale, Phoenician and Israelites and Muslims who are ruling the world today. OK, but they basically have just picked up that practice from the ancient world. All right. So, that's what that is. But a lot of these Freemasonic lies are put out to cause confusion because, when you can't figure this stuff out, you can't get the group economics together and and stop dancing on the checkerboard floor. So, maybe in the future I'll elaborate on that more, dancing on the checkerboard floor. But now you know what that means. It's the teachings that go back to ancient Israel, ancient Canaan, when the Shemitic Israelites were doing business with the Canaanite Phoenicians. They taught them masonry. They taught them merchandise. They taught them banking and finance, business. And the Shemitic Israelites became